Okay, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And as I was preparing for this talk, I came across some interesting information, a little bit of trivia. I discovered that in 2006, the actor Martin Sheen spent 6 months at this university. And you may recall that he played a fictional U.S. president on a series called The West Wing, very popular in the U.S. And he'd made this promise when they finished work on the series that he would treat himself to a semester here at the university, and he studied literature, philosophy, and oceanography. And it reminded me, sadly, that up until about 5 months ago, even fictional presidents of the United States cared about the ocean. So, I will have more to say about that later. But I worked for two real presidents who did care about the ocean. President Clinton, I was the Deputy Administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and also for President Obama, investigating the causes of the Deepwater Horizon explosion in the Gulf of Mexico. And like you, I think that we need to do more talking. We need to have more conversations about our ocean wealth because the public seems oddly disconnected from the ocean, and that is putting it at risk. I will admit that I love the ocean. I think that there is nothing that quite captures the imagination like it. The public oftentimes is enraptured with space exploration, but the fact is that some of the greatest unexplored areas are beneath the surface of the ocean. So my friend Bob Ballard, who found the Titanic, likes to say that kids come up to him oftentimes and say, I wish you would stop exploring because there isn't going to be anything left for me. And Bob always likes to say with a smile that, don't worry, I've only explored a fraction of it. And the fact is, and the good news for those kids that are asking him that, is that new technologies are coming online that are opening up these places. New technology is in a way providing us with keys to open doors that we thought were permanently locked to us. In some cases, doors that we didn't even know existed. And the 21st century, I believe, is going to be the greatest age of exploration in the history of humankind. There's still surprises out there. There's still mysteries that haven't been solved. There's even places we haven't seen and wonders waiting for us. And one of my favorite projects at National Geographic was an expedition to a chain of islands in the Pacific. It's about as middle of nowhere as you can get. It's a 2-day sail from Tahiti. You go sort of due north, and it's the Line Islands, the Southern Line Islands. And we put together an expedition to this chain of islands, and it was a rare chance to see the primal ocean, to see what the ocean should look like. The water there, I'm going to try to describe it, but I'll show you. The water there is like glass. You can see through it. It's so clear, it's almost like looking through air. And the corals come in every color, shape, size. And in a sign of a truly healthy ecosystem, one that is in balance, it's dominated by large predators. Every single dive that we made, we were surrounded by sharks. On some dives, there were as many as 30 and 40 of them swimming around us. Giant grouper and snapper. In fact, people obviously shudder when they say sharks. The most annoying were the snappers. When I was trying to take film, they'd come up to the mask and they'd start nibbling at my mask because they hadn't experienced these strange creatures that were in the water with all this equipment. And it was absolutely magnificent. And experiences like that make it clear how essential the ocean is, how essential it is to everything that we are, everything we want to be, everything that we'll become. And you know, the old sailors used to talk about sailing the 7 seas, and I'll talk to you about the 5 needs. We need the ocean to breathe. I often tell audiences, take a breath, take another breath. That first breath, the oxygen, came from all of the trees and green plants on land. That second breath, the oxygen came from the ocean. What would happen if you couldn't take that second breath? We need it to eat. The ocean feeds half of the people on the planet, and as we move towards 9 billion, the pressure is going to increase. The ocean controls the climate, and we need it to understand our world and to improve our lives. It holds about 1 million species, plant and animal. They carry secrets to the inner workings of the planet, how life began. There is still the potential of drugs and pharmaceuticals. And as our population grows, we're going to want more from the ocean, more minerals, more pharmaceuticals, more energy, more transportation, more water. And finally, it tells our story. It tells the human story. Preserved in the ocean are ancient civilizations and shipwrecks. Shipwrecks are time capsules. There is more human history sitting on the bottom of the ocean than in all of the museums on land. And so, on top of those 5 needs, there's something else. We need more people to understand it, to comprehend it, because right now it's at risk. So the problem is fairly simple. We are taking out all of the things that we like, and we're putting in all of the things that we don't like. It's a pretty simple formula. And let's start with overfishing. The FAO estimates that, there we go, about 60% of fisheries are fully exploited, 30% are overfished, and only 10% are underfished. Consequences are enormous. We've already removed about 90% of the largest predators, the lions and tigers of the sea, if you will. And we're moving down the food chain, putting more and more species at risk. Destructive fishing practices, illegal, unregulated fishing, inadequate fisheries management, among others, are at fault. So too is the global fishing fleet. We have too many vessels chasing too few fish. And an important factor in that is government subsidies. Governments spend about $35 billion each year subsidizing fishing fleets. That's 1/4 of the total global exports of fish and seafood products. These subsidies are encouraging a race to the bottom. In fact, in China, their distant water fleet is about 2,600 ships. Between 2011 and 2015, they provided $22 billion in subsidies, and that doesn't even count the subsidies that are provided by Chinese cities and provinces and other incentives that are offered to the fleets. This is essentially, as I said, a race to the bottom. And meanwhile, we're putting in a lot of things that we don't want. The ocean is downstream from everything. 80% of pollution, ocean pollution, is from land-based sources. That includes oil, pesticides, trash, nutrients that is from fertilizer from farms and lawns. Excessive nutrient loading causes explosive growth in algae and depletion of oxygen, leading to toxic algal blooms and dead zones. This is a bloom, I believe, off of Florida. About 20 years ago in the Chesapeake Bay, we had this devastating algal bloom that was caused by this very microscopic, simple organism, something called Pfiesteria. And it has these 22, 23 life stages. Most of them are benign, but there was this one toxic life stage that was triggered by nutrient loading, and it virtually shut down the economy of that region. There's 600 dead zones around the world, covering about 95,000 square miles. That's 3 times the size of Ireland. And just last week, researchers announced that it is very likely that the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico will be the third largest ever measured. One observer, she remarked, we're pushing the ocean back to the dawn of evolution, 500 million years ago when oceans were ruled by jellyfish and bacteria. So another emerging issue is plastics, plastic pollution. There are 5 trillion pieces of plastic debris in the ocean. We've heard about how it entraps wildlife, but it's just the sort of the tip of the problem. It's like an iceberg. There are 270,000 tons on the surface that float on the surface, and there are more than 4 billion plastic microfibers per square kilometer that float beneath the surface. And these microplastics are very difficult to deal with, very difficult to clean up. One load of, just as an example, one load of laundry can produce some 1,900 microfibers. And these plastics obviously go into the waterway, they're consumed by wildlife, and remember, it gets into the food chain, and guess who's at the end of that food chain? We are. And we have very little knowledge right now about the long-term impacts. Finally, climate change. That affects everything from coral bleaching to sea level rise. We know that climate change is also impacting storms. They're more frequent, they're more severe. Lloyd's just recently came out with a report that pointed to the loss of coastal habitat as contributing to the increase in damage from these storms. And by the way, will be driving the cost of insurance up if we don't take steps to protect those coastal areas. Another impact of climate change is acidification. The ocean traps about half of the carbon dioxide that we emit, so that's the good news. It's not getting into the atmosphere. The bad news is that it traps about 50% of the CO2 that we emit. And it's making the ocean more acidic. 50 years ago, well, even less than that, over the last several decades, in our lifetimes, we've done the unthinkable. We've changed the chemistry. Think about it. We've changed the chemistry of the ocean. We're making it more acidic. We've affected the pH. The old saying, the solution to pollution is dilution, is no longer true. If it ever was true. Trapping all of that CO2 has basically increased the acidity of the ocean some 30% from pre-industrial revolution times. And the last time it was this acidic was 265 million years ago, when 95% of marine life went extinct. And we're already seeing the impact on some ocean life, shells of some animals being impacted by this acidity. And then in the Arctic, in particular, climate change is introducing some significant risk of political, economic, and cultural instability. That region is warming about twice as fast as the rest of the planet, and it's undergoing what is likely the largest environmental state change on the planet. And when it's ice-free, a lot of things are happening, some perhaps good. It is going to open up new areas for navigation and shorten the transit time. It will reveal a treasure trove of oil and natural gas, something like an estimated $35 trillion worth. Last week, the Russian oil giant Rosneft announced that they had found the largest yet oil reserve on the Arctic coast. And finally, when it's ice-free, it will free up fisheries. There will be new areas for harvesting. But if not properly managed, these changes could lead to dangerous conflicts. It's no coincidence that the Russians are building 5 new military bases in the Arctic and that they are opening up closed bases. They have some 40 icebreakers and they're building 11 new icebreakers. And by contrast, the U.S. on a good day has 2 icebreakers that work. And so there's an imbalance there, but it also points to the value that they're placing on that area. The rush to harvest resources has the potential for leading to environmental consequences. Just think about what might happen if you had a deepwater horizon in the Arctic during the winter when it's ice covered. So that's the bad news, and I apologize if that makes you want to rush out of here and start the post-conference pint a little faster, but there's good news. The good news, first of all, is that the ocean is resilient. That is one of its key characteristics. With just a little bit of help, we can restore it to productivity, to full productivity. And the other bit of good news is we don't need a miracle to do that. We have the ability now, and as Tom was pointing out earlier in the day, it really comes down to innovation. In this case, policy innovation, technological innovation, and bold exploration. So, on the policy side, we know what needs to be done. I won't spend a lot of time there. It's the question of whether we have the political will to do it. Overfishing, we can eliminate fishery subsidies, unfair fisheries partnerships, the destructive fishing practices, and we can create marine protected areas. MPAs, marine protected areas, are one of the most effective ways of restoring productivity. Studies have shown that they have the ability over a relatively short period of time, 3 to 5 years, to increase the biomass within a marine protected area 200, 300, 400%. An incredible return, and it's not limited to just that area within the marine protected area, but rather it spills out over the boundaries and helps to restore the
points in the discussion, just to include our other panelists, yeah?
That's fine.
Okay.
So the hook has come out.
Grand. You just run out anyway. Grand. It was a natural end. Okay, thank you.